You may not know the speech or even the man who delivered it, but chances are you'll remember the phrase that he coined, a vast wasteland. On May 9, 1961, Newton Minow delivered a broadside against the television broadcasting industry in his first address as FCC chair. Mayhem and murder, he said, endless screaming commercials, and most of all, boredom. Those are just some of the choice words that he had. When television is good, nothing is better, he said, but when it's bad, nothing is worse. Well, Newton Minow long ago left Washington to its squabbles, but he has always been interested in the changing media landscape. Now, 50 years after the Vast Wasteland speech, he again has some thoughts on media, audience, and responsibilities. Newton Minow joins us from Chicago by Skype. Thank you so much for being with us today, sir.
Glad to be with you, Doug. Glad to be on Voice of America.
Well, we're glad to have you. You know, I'm curious, when you delivered that speech in 1961, what was it that you were hoping people would take away from that?
Mostly I was hoping that the broadcasters would be reminded of their public service responsibilities, that they had been given a great gift, the exclusive use of the airwaves, with a license required to serve the public interest. And I wanted to remind the broadcasters that with that gift went a very heavy responsibility.
Well, in fact, you throughout the speech you used the phrase public interest, and I'm wondering what you meant at that point by public interest, because it was something that you were clearly trying to emphasize to the broadcasters you spoke to.
Well, the law is where the public interest comes in. When broadcasting began in this country, Congress passed a law going back to 1934 that said that a broadcaster, in exchange for an exclusive license, would have to serve the public interest, not the private interest. And the FCC was created to enforce that obligation.
In 1961, in a room full of broadcasters, when you had some, frankly, very harsh things to say, do you think the message got through?
I think the message got through, but I think it wasn't only harsh things to say. I think I pointed out that when broadcasting was good, there was nothing better, which I happen to believe. I'm a television junkie and watch it all the time. One other thing I'd say about the Voice of America is that during the Cuban Missile Crisis, the Voice of America was being jammed wasn't received in Cuba. And President Kennedy wanted the Voice of America to be heard in Cuba, and I was given the assignment of getting 8 commercial American radio stations to carry the Voice of America to Cuba.
Interesting. And did you make the public interest plea at that point with them as well?
Well, they were very cooperative. I called each of them myself, and then President Kennedy's press secretary and I, Pierre Salinger, called them from the White House, and they were all very cooperative and carried the message. And the next morning, I was asked to go to the White House to hear a report on whether it had been heard in Cuba, and the answer was that it had succeeded.
50 laters were still being jammed in Cuba, and now, of course, being blocked on the internet in a number of places as well. I'm curious, though, going back to this speech that you delivered, you, in addition to the criticisms that you leveled, and as you said, you did spy a couple, I'll just call them oases, in fact, as one of our Facebook users called it. I mean, there were little pockets. There were good things that you were seeing on television then. So walk us 50 years forward now. You're a TV junkie. How much good stuff is there, and how much bad stuff is there still out on television?
If you're a discerning viewer, there's plenty of good stuff and also plenty of bad stuff. What I wanted to do, and I believe we succeeded in, was to enlarge the range of choice for the viewer. So we opened up cable. We opened up UHF. We opened up satellites. We did everything we could to enlarge choice, to enable more people to become broadcasters, and to enable the viewer and the listener to have a wider range from which to pick the programs he or she wanted to see.
61, viewers may have had an option of 2, 3, 4, 5 TV channels, perhaps at the most. Now we may have 500 or more, basically. We can pretty much see anything we want. I wonder, is choice always a good thing? I mean, is there perhaps too much choice out there?
Well, to me, anyone who believes in freedom, as I do, would argue that the more choice, the better. That's what our country is all about. The downside is that we've lost very often the sense of shared experience where everyone saw the same program at the same time. For example, when the first American landed on the moon, all of us were able to see that. But given the alternatives, I would say the more choice, the better.
Moments on television anymore, but I'm curious your thoughts as to how the internet may have come to supplant that. I mean, the viewership for television is falling. Just now, Nielsen says that for the first year in a lot of years, Americans have fewer televisions rather than more in their homes. So it seems to be internet, internet, internet. I'm wondering how you see the role of the internet and its responsibilities sort of in keeping with this public interest vein.
I see the internet and television getting married. I see that the two, within the next 10, 15, 20 years, will become so intertwined that you won't know the difference between the internet and television.
And is that a good thing? I mean, just given...
So,
what's that?
I think it's a very good thing. I think just the other day, we got the news that we had succeeded in tracking down Osama bin Laden and killing him. And that news flashed around the world in a matter of seconds, and everyone across the globe was able to share in that important development, which is the great benefit of broadcasting. When I gave that speech in 1961, President Kennedy had spoken the day before and had brought to the Broadcasters Convention the first American astronaut to go into space, Commander Alan Shepard. And there was a great example of how broadcasting, television, radio, had brought that experience to everyone in the country.
You know, I'm curious, television broadcasters, if they're over the air, they still have that public license. They still operate in the public interest in the United States. But, of course, anybody can put up anything they want on the Internet, and they have no public interest. They can just do what they want as they will. I'm just curious your thoughts as to how this changes our consumption of media and how we see it, what our responsibilities are as an audience.
Well, the fundamental difference in the two technologies is that anyone can be on the Internet and create his or her own program, his or her own information. But in television, there are a limited number of television channels, and they are allocated and given to different people to use exclusively, so there's a fundamental technological difference.
Of course, we mentioned it before. It's the words that have, been hung about you that you spoke, the vast wasteland. I'm curious, are people remembering the right things from that speech in 1961?
Well, the two words that I wish were remembered were public interest, not vast wasteland. I think that as long as we remember, and broadcasters remember, that they have major public responsibilities, that's what counts.
What do you watch on television these days? What do you enjoy?
My favorite program on television is CBS Sunday Morning, which I watch religiously. I've been watching it for years. I also am a great devotee of the Lehrer News Hour, of Ken Burns' series, particularly the one on the Civil War. I like the Mary Tyler Moore Show was my all-time favorite situation comedy, and I'm a television junkie. I watch it all the time.
I'm curious, what is it about those things? For example, CBS Sunday Morning or PBS NewsHour. What is it that you're enjoying that you find of value in those programs?
I can always learn something. And if you're curious about the world, or curious about our country, curious about your community, you can always learn something. That's the point.
And I'm just curious, one final question. Did you ever have the chance to maybe speak with the producers or even Mary Tyler Moore herself and let her know how much you valued her particular program?
I had a letter in Time magazine about it and heard from her. I was a great friend of Bert Tillstrom, the creator of Cuca Frananali, and I was Burr's lawyer. And Burr used to tell me that the Mary Tyler Moore Show reminded him of Cuca Frananali because it was people who worked together constantly, their friendships, their ups, their downs, and it was a joy to him to watch the Mary Tyler Moore Show because it made him think of Cuca Frananali, and I think Mary Tyler Moore enjoyed that too.
Minow, thank you for the thoughts and the memories. And if I'm hearing you right, it seems that you sound fairly optimistic as we move forward into the future.
Well, I am, and I've mentioned one other thing. One of the great pleasures I had as a result of that speech was that Sherwood Schwartz, the producer of Gilligan's Island, who didn't like my speech at all, decided to retaliate by naming the sinking ship in Gilligan's Island after me, the SS Minow, which I treasure as a reminder of that speech and those days.
Well, you live on in many ways. Thank you so much for the time, the thoughts, and all of your work over the past 50 years.
Well, thank you, Doug Bernard. I'm very pleased to send this message out through the Voice of America.